get into this mess, but more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Within the last hour or so, statements have come from the chairperson of the NatWest Banking Group and indeed its CEO. They admit serious errors of judgment. We now know that Dame Alison Rose was the source, yet her defence directly contradicts what we got from the BBC yesterday. Somebody is lying. In a moment, I'll tell you who I think it is. But for now, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening to you. Well, the breaking news this hour is that the CEO of NatWest has admitted to a serious error of judgment in discussing Nigel Farage's Coutts bank account with a BBC journalist. Yesterday, the BBC was forced to personally apologise to Mr Farage for its inaccurate reporting on the story led by business editor Simon Jacks, after it reported the reason for Mr Farage's Coutts bank account closure was because it held insufficient funds. Mr Farage uncovered through a subject access request that this was untrue and that his account had been closed because of unsubstantiated claims about his alleged political views. After Dame Alison Rose's admission that she'd been the source of the inaccurate BBC story, NatWest Group issued a statement this evening stating that after careful reflection, they still have full confidence in Dame Alison Rose in her position as CEO. But they hinted that her bonus this year may be affected as a result of the handling of the matter, which they said had been unsatisfactory with serious consequences for the bank. Well, full details on that and more analysis in Nigel's programme after this bulletin. Now, 2 firefighting pilots on board an aircraft which crashed while dousing flames with water in Greece this afternoon have both died, according to the Greek Air Force. The plane was helping to put out wildfires on the island of Evia. If you're watching on television, you can see the plane dropping water over the fire before crashing behind a hillside. Well, wildfires have consumed parts of Greece for 7 days now, forcing residents to retreat to shelters along coastlines. The Greek's Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, says there's no magic defence against climate change.
The next few days, especially today, tomorrow, Thursday, will be difficult days. After that, I hope that the conditions will help us more, and that is why we obviously remain on high alert. We know that things will probably get worse, not better, with warmer temperatures, more droughts, stronger winds. The morphology of our terrain makes putting out fires extremely difficult in many cases, so we have another difficult summer ahead of us.
Well, the fires aren't just affecting the islands in Greece. South of that, in Algeria, the number of deaths because of wildfires has risen today to 34. That includes 10 soldiers. 8,000 firefighters, we understand, are working to bring those blazes under control. And in Italy, wildfires forced the temporary closure of Sicily's Palermo airport. Only a limited number of flights were given permission to take off. That has since reopened. And in Tunisia, families have been forced to flee their villages as wildfires burn across mountain regions. The authorities there are trying to evacuate at least 2,500 people from the affected areas. Now, HSBC will cut its interest rates from tonight, making it the first high street bank to act following last week's better-than-expected inflation figures. The bank told GB News earlier the new rates will come into effect from midnight tonight. And it comes after figures last week showed inflation was at a 16-month low in the year to June. You are up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Just over an hour ago, a statement was issued by the board of NatWest Bank, and leading the charge was Howard Davis, the chairperson, as he describes himself, of the NatWest Group. What did he say? He said, the board has noted Alison Rose's statement on the circumstances of her conversation with Simon Jack and her further apology to Mr Farage. As she recognises, she should not have spoken in the way she did. This was a regrettable error of judgment on her part. The events will be taken into account in decisions on remuneration at the appropriate time. However, after careful reflection, the board has concluded it retains full confidence in Miss Rose as CEO of the bank. She has proved over the last 4 years to be an outstanding leader of the institution, as demonstrated by our results. The board therefore believes it is clearly in the interest of the bank's shareholders and customers that she continues in the post. The board is clear that the overall handling of the circumstances surrounding Mr Farage's accounts has been unsatisfactory, with serious consequences for the bank. The board will commission an independent review into the account closure arrangement at Coutts and lessons to be learnt from this. The findings of that review will be made public on completion. The terms of reference and lead firm will be announced shortly. And Alison Rose adds to that statement. Alison Rose, CEO, NatWest Group. I recognise that in my conversations with Simon Jack of the BBC, I made a serious error of judgment in discussing Mr Farage's relationship with the bank. Given the consequences of this, I want to address the questions that have been raised and set out the substance of the conversations that took place. Believing it was public knowledge, I confirmed that Mr Farage was a Coutts customer and that he'd been offered a NatWest bank account. Alongside this, I repeated what Mr Farage had already stated, that the bank saw this as a commercial decision. I would like to emphasise that in responding to Mr Jack's questions, I did not reveal any personal financial information about Mr Farage. In response to a general question about eligibility criteria required to bank with Coutts and NatWest, I said that guidance on both was publicly available on their websites. In doing so, I recognised I left Mr Jack with the impression the decision to close Mr Farage's accounts was solely a commercial one. I was not part of the decision-making process to exit Mr Farage. The decision was made by Coutts, and I was informed in April that this was for commercial reasons. At the time of my conversations with Mr Jack, I was not in receipt of the contents of the Coutts Wealth Reputational Risk Committee materials, subsequently released by Mr Farage. I have apologised to Mr Farage for the deeply inappropriate language contained in those papers, and the board has commissioned a full independent review into the decision and process to ensure this cannot happen again. Put simply, I was wrong to respond to any question raised by the BBC about this case. I want to extend my sincere apologies to Mr Farage for the personal hurt this has caused him, and I've written to him today. Well, what do we make of all of that? Well, the silence had been deafening, and given that NatWest half-year figures are out at 7 a.m. this Friday, and that Alison Rose has to make an investor statement at 9:30 on Friday, clearly they had to say something. What have we learnt? Well, we've learnt that she is the source. I mean, it was perhaps the worst-kept secret in British journalism this week, but it's been confirmed that she is the source. She's also written me a personal letter. The only difference in it is she gives me personally her unreserved apology. She makes it clear that it was Coutts' decision to exit me. Not the most pleasant word I've ever heard used. And that, of course, points to the CEO of Coutts, one Peter Flavel, a man that I've now written to 3 times. 3 times! I've not even had an acknowledgement of the receipt of the letters, though I know he's received them because he's got other people to ring me as a result of the letters. I did tell him in the last letter that if I couldn't find another bank account, I will be turning up in a few weeks' time at Coutts with a Securicor van to collect the balance of my account in cash. Still, nothing from him at all. As for Howard Davis, well, he, of course, as chairperson of the NatWest board and group, he is responsible for governance. And this is a serious breach. I hadn't said to anybody that the bank I was having trouble with Coutts. No, I'd kept stum on the matter. She chose to put it into the public domain with Simon Jack. She broke an essential confidence. Now, she argues here that Mr Jack clearly must be under some misapprehension. But what's interesting is if we go to the BBC letter yesterday that I got from Deborah Turness, the CEO of BBC News and Current Affairs, she says in this letter, the source said your accounts had been closed for commercial reasons. We felt this was a story of significant public interest and went back to the source to check they were happy to publish the information they said they were. So Mr Jack is making it absolutely clear, the BBC's business correspondent, that he was told that the balance in my account had fell below the minimum and therefore the decision to exit was made on a commercial decision. Jack also said there was no politics involved in this at all. It could be, at that moment, it could be that Alison Rose did not know just how political that decision had been. But there is no way, there is absolutely no way, if the BBC went back for a second time to confirm the story, that they would not have checked that it was the balance of my account that had led to that commercial decision. Someone is lying here. Of that, I have no doubt at all. And let's just take a look, shall we, at the FCA rulebook, because I think this is really very, very important. The conduct rules set minimum standards of individual behaviour in financial services. See how they apply to your firm. Number 1, you must act with integrity. Number 2, you must act with due skill, care and diligence. Number 4, you must pay due regard to the interests of customers and treat them fairly. I think on all of those counts, I have to say, on all of those counts, I think there has been complete failure in this regard. I think they're doing their best to prop up Alison Rose. Her remuneration will be hit. She might not get the £5.25 million she got last year. Gosh, my heart bleeds. I'm sure yours does too. But it is perfectly clear to me that Peter Flavel, the CEO of Coutts, has not done his job in any way at all. Perfectly clear to me that Alison Rose is unfit to be the CEO of a big group, and that Howard Davis, who is supposed to be in charge of governance, has failed as well. Given that we have a 39% stake in this, we, the great British public, I think at that investor statement on Friday morning, the government ought to say we have no confidence in this management. Frankly, I think they should all go. And that is my conclusion from what we've learned this afternoon. I'm joined for reaction by David Davis MP for Halton, Price and Howden, and somebody who has spoken about this in the House of Commons and subsequently. David, simply, your reaction to this statement.
Well, I ask your viewers to think to themselves, what would happen if a bank clerk, a lowly bank clerk or a local bank manager discussed their account with a journalist, well, with anybody, frankly, other than you or the police or the financial authorities? What would happen to them? They'd be dismissed. They'd be summarily dismissed. There wouldn't be any question about it. Confidentiality is the first duty of a bank. This is your most private affair. And as a result, as I say, a clerk or a local bank manager would have been dismissed. Well, do the responsibilities get larger or smaller as you go up in rank? The truth is they get larger. You should be more serious, more aware of your responsibilities, more aware of your customers' rights. And at this point, Nigel, you were the customer and your rights were being trampled on in a pretty spectacular way. So I'm afraid I think that Dame Alison Rhodes has little choice but to resign. And frankly, I'm astonished that the board of directors indicated full confidence in it. Frankly, if a head of a bank that I was a big shareholder of did this, I would say immediately, I'm sorry, it's over. Find your successor.
So let's just be clear, David, you think Alison Rhodes should go and perhaps some other senior management too?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I don't know what's happened at the board meeting, who said what and so on. I can't pick out any others, but Alison Rhodes seems to me, I mean, she is the source of the information. Talking to a BBC journalist about a hot topic, actually not telling him the truth, as it turned out, because that wasn't, you weren't. What was it? Exited. Well, you weren't exited for commercial reasons. You were exited for political reasons. Is the truth of the matter? But she plainly wasn't even aware, either wasn't aware of it or didn't say it. But the simple truth is, your rights were badly trampled upon by somebody who should have known. I mean, she's been in the bank for how many years? I mean, dozens of years, I think.
She's a lifer.
She should have. Yeah, she should have known better than anybody. So there's no doubt in my mind. Similarly, I think the position of the chief executive is looking pretty tenuous. I mean, if you don't get an answer from him before Friday, I would imagine that a great deal of the newspaper and media questioning of him will be precisely about your case. And so it should be, because, again, he has responsibilities. Banks, there was a lot of talk in the last few days when discussing your case that banks don't have to accept any customer, they can choose who the customer is. Well, it used to be a British citizen's right to have a bank account.
Absolutely.
In the days when the post office was public. That was taken away when the post office was privatised. But today, you can't operate without a bank account. It's a utility just as much as water is a utility. If somebody turned around and said, I'm cutting off your water supply because of your politics, it would be a front page uproar, wouldn't it? As this has been as well.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that the bank has behaved very badly at several stages, and certainly Alison Rhodes has broken the code upon which she should work.
David Davis, thank you very much indeed for your reaction. And we really must get Sir Vince Cable into the studio next week. He, after all, was in charge of the privatisation of the post office, which took away that right for the individual to have a bank account. Now, I said at the start of all of this, when I went public, this wasn't going to be just about me. It was going to be about the way the banks had been debanking all sorts of people, in particular small businesses. I'm going to come to that in a moment, but first I'm going to go to Nigel Brigden, Fellow of the Chartered Banker Institute and a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Bankers. Nigel, what does this say about the City of London and the UK's global reputation that a CEO admits a breach of confidence and yet is allowed to stay?
I think the whole situation is totally unacceptable. Just because I bank with NatWest or Coutts or HSBC and I have different political views is irrelevant. As long as I no longer, or I do not do anything which is illegal, then they should be happy with me as a customer. Simple as that. it's not their job to have an opinion with regard to my political views. It's no more complicated than that, and they should have no influence with regard to how I can conduct my business banking unless it is quite simply illegal.
And yet, it's happened. And we learn that increasingly the banks want to monitor the social media of their customers. I mean, has British banking gone rotten?
I think it has gone wrong. Just because I, as a customer, have different views from the bank's management is irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant.
Yeah.
I am an individual who conducts my business in a legal way. I don't break the law at all. When I break the law, then the bank can turn around and say, yes, we will close your account. But unless I break the law, there's no reason at all why they should at all attack me.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. That's how it should be. Nigel Brigden, thank you for joining us and giving us your reaction tonight here live on GB News.
A pleasure.
And won't tomorrow be interesting? Because the heads of 19 banks have been invited into Downing Street tomorrow to meet Andrew Griffith, the City Minister, and he's made it absolutely clear, his view exactly the same as Nigel Brigden's, that politics, political opinions should not come into this. 19 of them going to that meeting tomorrow. I wonder, will Dame Alison Rose be one of them that wanders up Downing Street? But this is affecting not just me, it's affecting thousands. Actually, it's affecting tens of thousands. And somebody who's tried to blow the whistle on this many, many months ago is David Soffer, founder and editor-in-chief of TechRound. David, welcome to the programme.
Good evening.
Give us some idea of the extent of what's been happening in our country.
So we actually covered this many months back in February. Yeah. People of all persuasions, businesses of various sizes got in contact with us and actually said, hey, this is happening to us. We covered it briefly and we were just inundated with people saying in February, this has happened to us. And this is larger businesses, smaller businesses, but everyone had a similar story in that what was happening to them is out of the blue. They're being told, by the way, your bank account's shut. You have X amount of time to, collect your funds and thank you very much. And everyone said the same thing. They said that the impact on my family, on me, on my business. And when it comes to businesses and startups, we cover businesses and startups every day.
Yeah.
And it's never really been a consideration for them to think, well, I might be shut out of my money, essentially.
Because it's very bad for the British economy, isn't it? I know startups feel they're being absolutely stifled by this. And of course, if your bank account is closed, your business account particularly, and you try and open a new one, that process takes months.
So it does. And opening a bank account at the best of times, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not, is very difficult. So to shut someone or a business out of their money, it's not something we've ever had to think about before or consider. It's not something, as a startup, it's hard enough to grow a business, to build a business, to maintain a business, maintain profitability. If you have no access to the money that you've rightfully and legally earned, well, it makes that process near impossible. And for people to be shut out of their accounts, and this applies to, people contacted us from national banks, large banks, challenger banks, online banks. It's not limited specifically to a particular bank. It's limited to the system of banking, whereby a lot of people have...
and money laundering fears, and any bank taking cash, and people who work in fossil fuel industries, and even customers investing in crypto have had their accounts removed. There are so many reasons being used here, aren't there?
There are, and I think no one tends to argue that if someone is overtly and clearly doing something illegal, there's precedent to investigate and close it.
Yeah, of course.
But in the case where there's just nothing proven, it becomes very difficult for a startup, because if someone's starting a business here in the UK, which traditionally has been a great place to build and grow a business.
Traditionally?
It has traditionally been a very good place to grow businesses. Some people still do successfully, but it's a consideration now that has never had to be a consideration before. You have enough to consider. If you operate in an industry that's heavily regulated, you have to consider things like that. If you operate in somewhere, a sensitive industry, you have to consider that. It's never been a consideration that, hey, I can go about my normal business and I may lose access to my money that I've earned. That shuts down a business potentially overnight. And it's something that people have never had to think about before.
We've got some changes to the rules being proposed by Andrew Griffith, and they're welcome ones. You know, a 90-day notice period, reasons need to be given. But we need a lot more than that, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, 90 days is better than 30 days.
Yep.
A lot of people who contacted us were given often 30, I think sometimes 60 days. 90 days is better, but again, you had a previous guest saying about a right to a bank account. It makes sense nowadays, particularly as less people are using cash. You can't, you know, in inverted commas, live off the grid. You can't just go about your business using cash. You have to have, as a business, you know, gone are the days of a cash register full of cash that you then go to the bank and you go bank it and all that.
Well, the bank, yeah, the local branch is closed anyway.
They won't take it. Exactly.
They won't take it.
They won't take it, or they're closed. So
Yeah.
I think to then shut a business out of its own money that it's rightfully earned, it's very concerning.
Well, well done for the great work you're doing on this. Keep going. Come back on the programme. Keep us up to speed. And, David, I will try to be a voice for those small businesses because to date, I don't think anybody has stood up and spoken for them. Thank you. Well, the whole system is rotten. British banking's gone rotten. It needs a Bud Light moment. Who knows? That may still happen. Coming up in a moment, we'll get Kelvin Mackenzie's reaction. First, we're going to take a break.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I must say, I see the Coutts NatWest struggle against myself now as being quite simply a battle for the truth. Who do you believe? Do you believe Dame Alison Rose, or do you believe Simon Jack and the BBC? That is how I see it. Let's go to Kelvin Mackenzie, former editor of The Sun and someone who's never been terribly backwards at coming forwards. Kelvin, am I framing this right?
Oh, yeah, no, it's 100% right. She's done for, by the way. The board may say they've got full confidence in her. Her problem is because you are a political figure, the government, they say we're political figures, it could have happened to us. The country owns 38.6% of NatWest. The board of NatWest can say they are full of confidence, as much confidence as they like. The 38.6% is represented by the government. They are going to force her out. You cannot have somebody sitting at a dinner, turning to the old journos. I love the journos. I love what Simon Jack has done. It turned out to be wrong. He was totally misled, which happens all the time if you're a journalist, right? And this time, she's been caught out. She is going. She can say what she likes. By the end of the week, they'll be looking for a new CEO. And not only that, the other person that's going to go is Peter Flavel, the CEO of Coutts. Now, I say this as somebody who banks at Coutts. So, thanks to you, Nigel, I'm taking it. I'm not going to be slung out. But the other person that now is in some degree of trouble is the chairman of NatWest, Sir Howard Davis, who has come forward and said, don't worry, she's done a great job. I'm not saying she hasn't done a great job, but she's done a very bad job for herself. A, she kept stum. B, she tried to pretend that it must have happened in some other, somebody else gave them the leak. And now she's been forced to say what the truth of all this is. I'm afraid that this is a catastrophe for the NatWest group. And actually, I don't feel sorry for her at all.
Kelvin Mackenzie, straight to the point, as he always is. Thank you for giving us your reaction here live tonight on GB News. And I have to say, there is this investors presentation at 9:30 on Friday morning, and the representative there from the British government, representing 38.6% of that banking group, which we own, gosh, our taxes went up to pay for it, has to declare no confidence. That's how it seems to me. Kelvin thinks that's what's going to happen. Now, a very good piece of investigative journalism by the Daily Mail on a subject close to my heart, a subject I think quite close to the viewers and listeners of GB News. Take a listen to what the Daily Mail journalists uncovered about a total scam in terms of getting asylum seekers to be able to stay in this country.
We can say that the Indian government accused you of pro-Khalistani. You were taken to custody, arrested, and you were ill-treated, tortured, sexually tortured, were frustrated, you wanted to commit suicide, Atmahatyam.
You need to establish that he fled from his country due to fear to his life on the basis of political opinion, religious matter, caste, race, or in a particular social group. These are the 5 ingredients of asylum.
He entered illegally in this country. So, there's a story आई ना तेरे ज़हन च
कोई भी आपको बस काम करवाएगा है बाहर
नहीं ये तो यार कहेंगे उन्होंने तेनों I'll make something out and bring it to me and give it to you and you will.
I'm joined by Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer. So let's get this straight, Ivan. There are members of your profession, qualified professional members, who are talking to people who, in my view, came to Britain illegally, and they're telling them claim modern slavery, claim sexual exploitation, and earning up to 10 grand a time for doing this. It's a complete disgrace.
It's a total disgrace and it's embarrassing. I'm ashamed of our profession being tainted by rogue solicitors like these individuals. And they should be investigated, and the SRA, when they've carried those out, with that evidence, they should be struck off.
The problem is, and it's a great piece of work by the Daily Mail, but the problem is, Ivan, we've heard this story before. We've seen this story many, many times over a long period of years, and I get there are big financial incentives, but nothing seems to improve. We're debating the banking industry and how it's policing itself at the moment. Is there a problem with the regulatory bodies within the legal profession in this country? Are they afraid to act?
The National Crime Agency has powers to put away these individuals.
Yes.
If anyone makes a fraudulent application, a disgenuine application, the penalty is 2 years imprisonment under Section 63 of the Borders Act 2022. So the powers are there.
OK, I get that. But the real question is, are those powers actually being used?
No, they're not. Look, suppose we lock up every bad solicitor, so we've got none in them. You're still going to get fraudulent asylum claims, because what asylum seekers do is tell each other of stories that work. They tell it to their friends and they encourage them. So I'm not aware of one single person the CPS has prosecuted for making a fake asylum claim.
You're not aware of a single case?
I'm not aware of a single case. So what the CPS needs, we need to prosecute, we need to deter, and it's a criminal offence, and you can be imprisoned for up to 2 years. Now, why are there no prosecutions? That's the deterrent we need.
Well, it's your profession. You tell me. I don't know the answer to it.
With due respect, I don't regulate
No, I know.
Yes.
I know. Problem is here, Ivan, that because of cases like this, the centre of gravity of the public opinion's sympathy for anybody claiming refugee status declines as a result of this, when no doubt there are some people who genuinely are in need of refuge.
Yeah, and that is unfair. Look, we can't taint all asylum seekers. Look, the grant rate for countries like Syria, Iraq, Iran, Eritrea, they're in the 90s. Now, countries like Albania or Pakistan, we should look at them with a bit more... we should really prosecute those ones. We should really look at the detail and have properly trained people to assess these asylum applications. Look, if we had no solicitors doing this, and we know there's fake asylum applications, whose responsibility is to root them out?
Well, it's the Home Office, presumably, to weed out the applications.
Absolutely. Do they have systems to do that? And this is a problem. So we need a proper, robust system to catch out fake asylum.
But equally, much as I'm complaining about the rotten banking system, we need your profession to get its house in order.
100%. And a way forward could be, like in many other countries, where certain solicitors are approved. You have that in criminal defence work. Only certain approved solicitors can do that work. And the government should think about approving certain solicitors to carry out this type of work.
Well, Ivan, thank you. And for all of you at home, if you were upset and annoyed by what the Daily Mail revealed, I bet you're really very angry after what Ivan Sampson has just told us about the complete failure within the legal profession in this country to deal with this. It simply is not good enough. In a moment, we'll talk about the Rhodes evacuation. It seems, though, that flights are still going there. I can't quite work it all out.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I've never really quite understood why people want to go to the Mediterranean, to really hot countries in July and August, but they do. And I guess given how awful the weather has been here and the ruining of our test matches, maybe that's why they do it. But, goodness me, some huge problems, and particularly in Rhodes, where the situation has been, frankly, pretty bloomin' dangerous. GB News reporter Paul Hawkins is there right now. Paul, I mean, some of the reports, people literally being told to flee.
Yeah, essentially. Confusing advice for the last 5 days. We've been speaking to tourists here, mostly, of course, British, but there are from other parts of Europe, other European countries, other tourists here. And we spoke to, just to give you an example, Nigel, we spoke to one woman earlier who said that on Saturday, they just got to their hotel. They were then told to evacuate straight away to the north of the island. That's the safe part of the island. We're in the part of the island just on the edge of the fires, which cover 10% of Rhodes. They were told to evacuate. They spent a night there in a school, no beds, no air conditioning, but the operator sent them there because it was the safest thing to do. Their daughter suffered from epilepsy, so she couldn't sleep properly, and she was having problems with her epilepsy. So they then phoned the hotel back and said, can we come back? Because at least, although you don't have any electricity or water anymore, at least you've got a bed. And they were reluctant for them to come back because they didn't want to be going against the advice of the Greek authorities. They hadn't heard anything from the operator. They came back to the hotel. They're now going to stay there. The reps have been around today. We know that the operator TUI has increased the number of reps on the island and has been giving more advice and more options and more information, which critically had been in short supply before. But essentially all I'm trying to say is that it was a confusing picture and people aren't sure whether to stay or to go. I mean, there was a bus that turned up at one hotel and the bus driver didn't know where he was going to take the people that were being evacuated. So it was a confusing picture. But certainly, I can say one thing is absolutely been universal, and that is praise for the Greek people on this island, not just in the way they've been helping with the tourists in the centres, bringing food, bringing water. There have been reports of taxi drivers dropping off tourists, helping them get to the evacuation centres and not charging them for it, but also the volunteer firefighters on this island that have been helping the regular firefighters, and everyone kind of pulling together to try and mitigate the fires, which at the moment, I don't know if you can see, Nigel, in the background, we're on the edge here, right in the distance, you can see the fires. Those have been strengthening in the past half an hour, and they've stopped dropping water. And just to the left of us, I don't know if you can pick it out over the trees, there's a small village at the bottom here, and we think that we've been told that some of the residents there have been evacuated, and some of them are British nationals that have retired here. So, there is some disruption to what is going on in the island. If you're in the north near the hotel, no disruptions, fine, carry on with your holidays. There are some evacuation centres, but if you're in the south here, there is some significant disruption, and there is a worry that the fires could get out of control. One thing to note, we have had 2 fatalities here today. 2 Greek RAF pilots on the island of Evia lost their lives dropping water there, and as far as we understand, those are the first 2 fatalities as a result of the fires here in Greece. So the Greek Ministry of Defence calling 3 days of mourning there in honour of those pilots, and the Prime Minister, the Greek Kyriakos Mitsotakis, holding a cabinet meeting earlier, and he said it was completely dominated by the weather here. He said that there is no magic defence for these fires and that the Mediterranean was what he called a hotspot for climate change.
Of course, climate change comes into it, but there is something to do with weather as well. I know in 1977 they had an exceptionally bad time with fires. Final thought, if I may, Paul. You mentioned in that report people were still arriving on Saturday, literally getting to hotels and being evacuated. Have the travel companies just been too blooming greedy here?
No, I think it's been a confusing picture. I mean, the person that I spoke to earlier, she said, look, we understand that safety is a priority. We just wish that they had said, you know, don't come right, don't you know, advise us to stay at home first. I guess what they would say is, look, the advice from the Foreign Office is check with your travel operator. So there's so potentially there's a little bit of passing the buck here in terms of responsibility. But certainly, I think now people are happier with their tour operators and with the accommodation providers, and information appears to be flowing, at least in some sort of reasonable way.
Paul Hawkins, thank you very much indeed. Now, I want the Farage moment. Amidst the incredible number of emails I'm getting about the banking situation, there are one or two other little gems that have come in. This one came in overnight. We checked it. It's dead true. It's a proper what the Farage moment. It is that the British government, to the tune of nearly £700 million, is going to help to fund a new railway project in Turkey. And the reason they're backing it is it will reduce CO2 emissions. Now, it is supposed to be a loan rather than a gift, but given that nearly all major transport infrastructure projects run over time and over cost, I would have thought it very unlikely we'll get that £680 million back at all. But I suppose if the government thinks it'll help save the planet, whilst the Chinese are busy building 80 new coal-fired power stations every year, well, if that's what you think, perhaps it makes you really very, very happy. Now, one political figure called very clearly and very openly for Dame Alison Rhodes to go a couple of days ago. His name, Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'm going to have a full sit-down chat with Jacob in just a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Before Jacob Rees-Mogg, a quick reflection on what's going on within British banking, and in particular within Coutts. I'm joined by Oliver Lewis, author and former Coutts employee, and somebody, when he was there, that was involved with business development. Oliver, saving the planet and promoting LGBTQ+ rights, how does that improve business performance?
Well, being open-minded here, Nigel, I think there was a case of saying, obviously, there was public pressure to reflect societal changes. I suppose the business decision is whether there is incremental bottom line improvement. Now, given Coutts' client profile, I would wager that probably focus on those topics won't result in a terribly massive bottom line improvement. You know, as you know, Nigel, a director of a company's responsibility is to the company, no one else. It is to the company, and I think that's where a lot of the problems of this issue are coming up against not just commercial reality, but legal reality as well.
My case, Oliver, and perhaps in the case of many others, I mean, Coutts have become a moral arbiter. You know, that somehow my views do not align with the values of the bank. I mean, they sound almost like a political party now.
Yeah, I mean, when I was at Coutts, politics, the organisation was not terribly political. There seems to have been a change, I think, more broadly in the way our political and media elite and commercial elite indeed, wish to shape public debate, so that it's top down rather than bottom up. You know, going back to those issues, to those topics you mentioned earlier, yes, there is some upward pressure from society as a whole, but a lot of this is coming top down from communications teams that have their own little agendas, human resources teams, all of that. So that really is the disturbing thing, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And actually, in many cases, they're minority views. There is a silent majority on many of these issues that would much rather Coutts just stayed as a bank. What do you think, Oliver, will happen now?
Well, I've been following this story closely, and it just amazes me that Alison Rose would sit next to a BBC journalist at a dinner and discuss the private affairs of one of their clients. It is public knowledge that there are several very high-profile clients that Coutts banks, very, very high profile.
Yeah.
But just because it's public knowledge, it doesn't mean that you should sit next to a BBC journalist and discuss them. Alison Rose is not a novice. She's worked for NatWest Group all her life. She was a graduate trainee, joined in, 1991 or something. It's told you from the beginning in the banking industry, you never share personal details, okay? Even going on someone else's account that you have no justification to do could result in dismissal. If a cashier did that, they could be dismissed if they were spying on their neighbours, savings or whatever. So for the chief executive to do this is frankly absolutely outrageous. I mean, I still can't quite believe it. The other concern I have is that I suspect, obviously I can't prove this, but I suspect NatWest Group's communications teams would have briefed her. All these senior executives, I used to write these briefs. Yeah. They're given a brief, they're told what to say, and that for me is the interesting dynamic now. What was NatWest Group Communications channeling to Alison Rose to drop into the conversation with BBC journalists?
Oliver, it beggars belief. Thank you for your thoughts. And Oliver Lewis there, Jacob, reflecting very much what David Davis was saying earlier that if a junior clerk had done this, they'd be out.
She has got to go. There doesn't seem to be any two ways about it. That she gossiped with a BBC journalist. Turns out her defence is that her gossip was careless and that accidentally she revealed this information. Look, I bank with Coutts, part of NatWest.
For now.
Well, no, I want to carry on banking with them. I've always assumed and expect that my information is confidential and that the chief executive of the NatWest wouldn't actually know the details of my account. I wouldn't have thought there'd be any reason for her to know the details of my account or the details of your account. Yeah. This is a fundamental of banking.
So she admitted breaching the code by saying that I was a Coutts customer. She then says she talked generally about what's on the website, about what clients ought to have, although the whole thing's discretionary, for obvious reasons. But Simon Jack is absolutely clear and says he checked again the next morning. So someone's not telling the truth, are they?
Well, who has something to protect by not telling the truth?
Could it be an income of £5.25 million last year? Would that have anything to do with it?
That is a suspicion that doesn't seem entirely unwarranted. But it doesn't matter that if your doctor had sat next to the medical correspondent of the Times and had said, I think Nigel doesn't drink as many units a week as he pretends, or some equally scurrilous thing, and that was printed, that doctor would have to resign, that the regulatory authorities would look into it. And the Information Commissioner should be looking into this, the FCA should be looking into this, and the government is, of course, the biggest shareholder in NatWest.
And Friday's a big day. Friday we get the 6-month figures, and she gives a presentation to investors at 9:30. The biggest investor is a breakaway from the British government. They should speak on Friday, shouldn't they?
Well, if she's still there on Friday. I think the pressure on her is going to get bigger and bigger. You can't admit to this type of indiscretion and remain a senior banker. You have broken a key rule of the banker's code.
Yes, and what does it mean for the financial services industry, Britain's biggest industry? The world looking in. This is not very pretty, is it?
No, it's that the NatWest isn't serious about doing business. All of this comes back to her as well. The committee at Coutts, which decided not to have you and said extraordinarily, potentially libelous things about you, and I'm sure you're looking into this, was set up at her instigation, as I understand it, of her desire to make the NatWest more diverse and inclusive.
Cultural change. We have some breaking news here. The political editor of the Times newspaper is reporting this evening that... What's he reporting? Multiple cabinet ministers think Alison Rose's future as CEO of NatWest is untenable. One said she has done material damage to the bank and its reputation. So cabinet ministers voicing very much what Jacob Rees-Mogg was saying just a moment ago. And what really annoys me, Jacob, just quickly, is through their greed and stupidity, Fred the Shred and all the things that we remember from the RBS group as they were known then, our taxes went up as a result of this. And this is how they behave.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There was an interim period when it was run really quite well, but I'm afraid Dame Alison has not run it in the interests of banking, in the interests of making a profit for the British taxpayer.
The Mog has spoken. More from him in just a moment. First, the all-important July weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your GB News weather forecast. Well, the next few days it's set to remain unsettled across the UK, further spells of rain, but in between we will see some sunshine. Reason for the unsettled conditions is these two areas of low pressure, really not going to go very far over the next few days. And with a northerly wind, it's going to feel pretty chilly at times, especially by night under some clearer skies. But for parts of Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England, actually tonight, we will remain fairly cloudy here with some outbreaks of rain. But elsewhere, relatively dry and clear, and as I mentioned, under the clear skies, feeling pretty chilly for this point in the year. Towns and cities staying in double figures, but out towards the countryside, we could see lows falling down to around 5 to 6 degrees. But compensation will be, for most of us, we'll start the day with some sunshine on Wednesday. Still this area of cloud and showers across parts of southern Scotland and northern England, and that will continue to linger here for much of the day. But elsewhere, as I mentioned, some sunshine. But for Northern Ireland, cloud will thicken as the morning goes on, with some rain arriving here by lunchtime, and that cloud and rain also spreading into parts of Wales and southwest England as the afternoon goes on. So here, we've combined with a strengthening wind, feeling pretty chilly as the afternoon moves in. But elsewhere in the sunshine, not feeling too bad for the time of year, with temperatures around average. And then as we go into Thursday, this band of rain will sweep its way across the UK, bringing further spells of showers